now we're all silent.
It's still setting up.
Okay. It's better with a slide on.
So I'll wait a couple more minutes just to give people a little bit of time to join us on YouTube and enter the room at 4, because it sometimes takes a minute. So I'll start a couple minutes after 4.
Okay, great. Just waiting. Oh, Jennifer Trainor's on.
All right, I think we've reached a critical mass enough. So welcome to our program today on food insecurity in the East Bay. I'm Laurel Plimier, the president of the League of Women Voters. And for some reason, Christy's video is still showing on the live stream on YouTube, but I apologize for that. So we're grateful for everyone who was able to take the time out of your day to be with us virtually here this afternoon. Before we get to the introduction of our speaker and topic, I just wanted to cover a few logistics. So if you're on the Zoom call with us, please remain muted to minimize background noise. You can post your questions now or at any time during the conversation, either in the Zoom chat or the YouTube comments. And you can also email them if you'd like to lwvpiedmont@gmail.com. And I'll ask as many of them as time will allow. And I also just wanted to say that today is the official launch of our food drive. And so I'm just going to pop up here really quick what our food drive looks like. And you can purchase various items to help hungry people in our local community. And I will post the link in the chat and also in the YouTube comments. So without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Julie, who is one of our program committee chairs, to introduce our speaker.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm Julie Chang, and I'm a member of the League of Women Voters of Piedmont, and I get the honor of introducing our guest speaker today, even though I just met her a minute ago. I read up on her. Her name is Suzan Bateson, and she's been the executive director of the Alameda Community Food Bank, Alameda County Community Food Bank since 2001. So that's only 19 years, but man, she's done a lot in those 19 years. Under her leadership, the food bank has tripled the annual food distribution. So now 32 million pounds of food gets distributed every year. And the program that she's running also looks at the causes, what's causing the hunger problem in the East Bay. And under her leadership, the food bank has stopped distributing soda pop and instead has increased the fresh farm produce from 1 million pounds a year to 20 million pounds a year. That's amazing, just for the East Bay. So the food bank in Alameda is so great that it's won awards for the kind of work it does under Suzan's leadership. In fact, in 2016, the Alameda Food Bank won the Feeding America's National Food Bank of the Year award. Yay! So I'm very happy. I'm thrilled to turning over the microphone to Suzan Bateson, who is the executive director of the Alameda Food Bank.
Thank you so much for the warm welcome, and I am delighted to be here this afternoon. Yes, I've been with Alameda County Community Food Bank for 19 years, and one of the things that attracted me to the food bank was its bent towards advocacy. I knew that providing food to people for their immediate needs was really an important and integral part of food bank services, but I yearned for more. And I love that ACCFB was focused on changing the system, making systemic change to ensure that people were had the resources that they needed to be happy and to thrive, to be nourished and to be successful. I have brought a couple of things along to the party. My strong nutrition focus, being raised in California, I thought it was really important that everybody have access to California grown fruits and vegetables. And as was mentioned, we went from providing well under 1 million pounds of produce a year to 20 million pounds of farm fresh produce in our community. That's health and well-being to the people in our community. Also, I was very, very interested in learning more about, 10 years ago, the word was diversity. Now we refer to it as our equity and inclusion work, moving towards belonging. And that has been a real hallmark and something I'm incredibly proud of. Today, what I'd like to do is like to share where we are 5 months in to this unprecedented time. We've witnessed dramatic changes to the way we work. And I don't think it's a spoiler alert to say that the recovery from the pandemic and the economic situation that has ensued will take years. I'm really grateful to the League of Women Voters of Piedmont. You're critical to our response. I love that you're doing a virtual food drive, and we consider you our partners. I'm going to give you an overview of our work, and I look forward to answering some of your questions. So first, let's talk about hunger in the time of COVID. We knew communities impacted the hardest would be children, adults, and seniors that we already helped, that these folks would need food and legislative support and intervention as well. We had research data to guide us, so we were in a pretty good position. We knew that there is an indisputable overlap between poverty and the COVID impact. Where food insecurity is concentrated in Alameda County, you're likely to see COVID concentrations. I want to acknowledge that communities of color are disproportionately affected by poverty and hunger. 7 in 10 of people living in poverty are people of color. It's a sad fact that our Black, Brown, Indigenous, and other communities of color are disproportionately affected by COVID. For instance, 50% of Alameda County's COVID-19 cases as of July 19th were Latinx, despite being less than 25% of the population. In the headlines, we've all seen it. The mortality rate is highest in the African American community. The point is, people of color are frequently in harm's way. On the front lines, we know the effect of high rents finds neighbors living in congested housing, also caring for elders, children, and a host of other responsibilities. I say this acknowledging that I'm a white woman leader and I continue to learn about the systemic effects of racism as the food bank strives to eliminate disparities. This is why we work on racism. Race is a determining factor of poverty, which drives hunger. We know we can't end hunger without addressing racism. So a quick snapshot. Before COVID, when we were serving 1 in 5 county residents, our goal was to provide food for 29 million meals, and that was a stretch goal. During COVID, immediately, our bellwether was indicating a change. Our helpline, which really is our barometer on community need, the volume went up. So to explain, our emergency helpline is a way that the community can contact us and find out where they can get a same-day source of food. We refer them to our network of member agencies, almost 300, located in every corner of the county. Again, going back to the helpline volume, it increased almost immediately 1,000%. It's still elevated, but certainly not to the extent that it was. And that's a good thing because it indicates that our callers are connecting with the same day source of food in the community, which is what we want people to do. We want them to know where they can get groceries any day of the week. The other great thing about the helpline is that we can screen our callers, the households, for CalFresh possibility. And CalFresh is a program in California. It's called CalFresh because in California we're different. We rename everything. But you may have heard of it as food stamps or SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. And that is America's first line of defense against hunger. We want any household that qualifies for CalFresh to enroll in it. And we provide application assistance at ACCFB. So CalFresh application assistance is currently up 50%. Another thing that we're watching quite closely is unemployment data. And in Alameda County right now, unemployment is hovering at 13.4%, down from a high of 14%. But we know this number will fluctuate over time and that we haven't seen the worst of unemployment. We estimate that children, adults, and seniors needing food from the food bank and our network has doubled. So to give you an idea of who we're serving, I'd like to talk about a woman named Jules. She's an Oakland resident. She's also a volunteer at a food bank member agency called Our Solace House. Now, I could go on for hours about the great work that Our Solace House does. They offer many programs, including helping people with reentry and providing food to homebound seniors. But back to Jules. Jules works for a surgeon in Oakland, so she has a job. And during COVID, she had to curtail her volunteering, but now goes to Our Solace House to pick up groceries for her 84-year-old mama, who is homebound and is contending with cancer. Jules, like many food program participants, has a job and is a loving caregiver to a relative. So what is ACCFB's role in emergency response? Well, to start off, food banks are emergency responders. So we felt we were prepared. We practice, and in a normal disaster situation, we would have a tremendous amount of backup. Our national network, Feeding America, would deploy resources to the 1 or 2 affected food banks at a time. And nearby food banks would offer mutual aid and support. And in the Bay Area, that would be our local Bay Area food banks helping our food bank in the event of a disaster, just like we helped our neighbors to the north during the fires last year. We are first responders who are also recovery responders, serving our community long after many first responders depart. Of course, our current situation is uniquely challenging because the pandemic and the economic effects of the pandemic are occurring simultaneously. But again, we felt we were prepared. We didn't know exactly what to expect, though. Would this be like SARS? We began convening in February, thinking ahead and planning. We have regular incident command drills, and the incident command system is a wonderful practice that many organizations use. And for instance, when our phones would go out or when we'd have some business interruption, we would go into our incident command system and handle and practice our event, and so that we would be prepared when a larger event occurred. We have close relationships that makes us extremely well positioned in the event of a disaster. We work with the Office of Emergency Service. We're connected with county officials and state officials. We're networked. We're members of California Association of Food Banks, Feeding America. We have close connections with elected officials, and we felt we were deeply involved and connected and well positioned by the time shelter-in-place order came down. Again, we had an emergency network, those emergency food providers in virtually every corner of the county. We immediately had help from Alameda County officials. We added programming, including ensuring that our equity work that I mentioned earlier was at the very center of our practice and our response. And then we began to see the effects of COVID. Our food output went up 20%. Then 50%, then 70%. In June, we sent 78% more food into the community than we had in June of 2019. We were up to distributing 1 million pounds of food a week, enough food to serve 60,000 people daily. So thinking about our hunger relief efforts in the time of COVID, we knew that our focus would be on serving children, adults, and seniors. And it relied on two big factors: increasing capacity to reach all who needed food. This was above and beyond our current network's ability to serve. Our agency network leaders have done an amazing job, but could only take on so much more. Furthermore, 20% of them almost immediately shut down because they were run by volunteers that were vulnerable to COVID. Our number two factor was safety. How could we distribute more food more rapidly, completely changing our model? And our model was staging our food distributions like farmers market, really shopping. And now we had a 180 shift away from people congregating and making our facility and our food distribution safe for the participants, for volunteers, for our staff, for our community. Inside our facility, we had a dual approach: accommodate an additional hundreds of thousands of pounds of food coming in and going out. I mean, as I mentioned, in June, we had that 78% increase. It meant completely overhauling our volunteer efforts to operate safely and distribute what we refer to as kitted food, which means packed in bags, which would be the safest way we could deploy the food into the community. No more farmers market style distributions. For staff safety, we had to send half of our team out of the facility almost immediately to work remotely to ensure that our staff that was concentrating on bringing the food in and distributing the food were safe and that they were protected. Outside our facility, distribution also altered. We became experts in the new contactless drive-throughs. And I'm sure you've seen pictures of these distributions because at the beginning of COVID, they were all over the news. And this was a microcosm for how we've altered our response. Going back to my opening remarks, communities of color. Our first two contactless drive-through sites were in East Oakland and Hayward, two of the hardest hit communities. Our first drive-through happened right away on March 30th in East Oakland at that zone building that's across the freeway from the Coliseum. In the soft opening, we served 28 cars and we were pretty proud of ourselves. Now we collaborate on 4 drive-through distributions, one in Hayward in concert with city officials in Chabot College, in Pleasanton in partnership with the Sheriff's Department and Child Protective Services, and in Fremont in partnership with an organization and member agency known as Tri-City Volunteers. And collectively, those 4 distributions are serving 20,000 people and 100,000 pounds each week. These are big, mega efforts, and they couldn't be done without a host of volunteers and support. Another area that emerged right away and was of vital importance was our community's children. Families with children are among the most vulnerable served by ACCFB. And the minute we heard that schools were going to be closed, we knew we had to step up. Many families in our community are so grateful for the school's contribution to their children's nourishment. Ensuring that our community's children were fed was not just an ACCFB priority, it was top of mind of our entire community, from a parent down the street to the governor. Our very first action was in the first week of response. We delivered emergency bags to Oakland Unified School District sites in partnership with Stephen and Aisha Curry's Eat, Learn, Play Foundation. Bags, preparing those bags was a tactic we had learned from the government shutdown the year before, quickly putting together 15 pounds of healthy, shelf-stable food. They were quick to assemble, easy to distribute safely. And from that first distribution to Oakland Unified Schools, this distribution has grown to 12 school districts, 50,000 meals weekly in kitted food bags. And beyond the schools, we're distributing 12 to 15,000 emergency food bags a week to 30 additional sites. We could not do this work without volunteers. Many steadfast volunteers. At first, they were provided through the AmeriCorps and through CiviCorps and through county disaster workers. We're slowly now bringing volunteers back into our facility to help with sorting the food. And the county disaster workers remain with us, but other emergency volunteers have been deployed elsewhere. Also, it became clear to us the bookended generation of seniors, the other largest group we served, and homebound populations also presented immediate challenges. We were fortunate in that we had home delivery partners, organizations like Mercy Brown Bag, an innovative group that sprung up called Oakland at Risk, our Solace House that I mentioned earlier, but we knew we needed to expand services to seniors. We developed through our helpline home delivery, and we were aided by the gig economy company TaskRabbit in home deliveries, and Amazon Flex. Amazon has helped food banks across the country and has delivered food to homebound households, about 540 of them thus far, and we have their help through the end of this month. So moving forward, this snapshot kind of illuminates the programming that we've quickly developed over the last 5 months. It's a good indication of how we'll operate over the foreseeable future. We're also looking at how we will modify our facility to stay at this velocity of food distribution. We've never distributed food at this volume, and there are some modifications that we're going to have to make. What this will take moving forward and what it's going to take, it became really clear to us that we don't work in isolation. Everything we do is complex and requires partnerships and collaboration. For example, we're advocating for responsive government policies and leveraging public sector resources, and that remains key. At the federal level, and you're probably hearing about all this right now, waivers of certain restrictions allowed programs like the National Free and Reduced Price School Meal Program to function in pandemic conditions. Pandemic EBT, Electronic Benefit Program, gave additional money for food to thousands of families and young children in Alameda County. The Coronavirus Food Assistance Program helped us acquire and distribute 1 million pounds of fresh produce, prepared meat, and dairy products. Many programs are set to expire. That Coronavirus Food Assistance Program is only around through October, and additional unemployment funding and other temporary supports are in peril. We must continue to fight for what's right to keep families on their feet. The state of California will provide $70 million this year to purchase food for California's network of food banks. We need all the help we can get. Locally, the public-private partnership with Alameda County leadership has been essential and profound. The county has given us space and logistical support like PPE and traffic management to run those drive-through food distributions. The county provided and coordinated the deployment of disaster service workers that I talked about earlier. They've packed food in our warehouse and supported food distributions, backfilling community volunteers during shelter in place. And we continue to work collaboratively to connect community members to CalFresh at this time now, when our communities most vulnerable need it the most. We're partnering with school districts, and that has been the centerpiece to reach children and families most severely impacted by the crisis. These partnerships will deepen as we prepare for the uncertain future of school. We all know this is real, and it's now. Currently, we are working with county government to develop sustainability plans for operational collaborations, such as home deliveries of food to people diagnosed with COVID-19 or otherwise ordered to quarantine. What will the next couple of months, the rest of the year, the next couple of years look like for ACCFB? Well, I can tell you one thing, we're a dramatically different organization than we were on March 12th. We'll be implementing new programs and approaches, allowing us to reach more people and move more food faster. And of course, this requires resources. We're expanding our staff, we need more trucks, we'll have to modify our facility, and we'll absolutely need to make more investments in our network. We'll continue spending about $1 million a month to purchase food, when last year we spent between $200,000 to $300,000 a month. And the environment we operate in has changed dramatically. COVID-19 has exacerbated food insecurity. To that end, ACCFB is gathering and analyzing data every day to help ensure resources are going to the most vulnerable in our community. This is how we root our work and our values. It's clear that communities of color are disproportionately affected by COVID-19, and that we must center equity as we develop programs and advocate for policies that will support recovery. Again, this is why we're here, and why we have much to learn and many more miles to travel on the road to a recovered economy. I have to say that this is an exciting time to lead, and that we're fortunate to have our team in place, a dream team of a board of directors, and to have the community, you, behind us as we go forward. Thank you for your support, and can we open to questions now?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. This was really enlightening for me personally, and I'm sure it is for all of our other viewers too. First question I have is about funding. So you mentioned that your costs are much higher this year as compared to last year with the pandemic. Where are the excess funds coming from, and how is the food bank handling that huge increase in demand financially?
So it's no secret that community is our middle name, and most of our funding comes from people like you and me. We had an outpouring of response to the COVID pandemic, and many, many more people joined you and me supporting the food bank. So individuals are the primary supporters of ACCFB. And in the past, that's traditionally happened during the holiday season. And I imagine you were like me, that you would go out and spend money on that Thanksgiving dinner and think, oh my gosh, if I had a minimum wage job, how would I treat my family to a lovely meal? And in fact, how are families getting by anyway? And that's when people would start to give. And of course, food bank stories are more highlighted during the holidays than other times of year. Next in of our supporters are corporations and foundations, and then coming in third are local, county, state, federal funds that help us help people in our community.
So a question that is more in line with what we do in the League of Women Voters. So we're very concerned about voter registration, and this is a year for the census. So we're also concerned about getting an accurate census count. And it seems like there's an overlap in the populations of people who might need voter registration and additional push to fill out their census form. And we're wondering if there's any overlap with the work that you do, if you have any volunteers ever on your site that would help facilitate those programs.
Not only volunteers, but we have staff that help facilitate those programs. And normally I would talk about that in my remarks, but I and encourage you to support our census and support our motor voter work. But I know that you're already doing that, so I didn't have to give that pitch today. One of the things we've done together is voter education too, and that's been really great for us. Also supporting candidates nights, which are very important, and of course centering the evening around issues of hunger and poverty. So yes, we're involved in getting people in to participate in the census, and yes, we are very involved in helping people register to vote, and also reminding them to vote on election day, because registration is one thing, but as you know, we need to get our registered voters to the polls, or to the mailbox this year.
Absolutely. Has there been any threat to the availability of food because of COVID for your food providers? And sort of along those same lines, there have been news stories about meatpacking plants, about farmers plowing under their fields, and how has that affected your food supply?
So, gosh, that's like 3 questions in one. So if I miss one, prompt me, okay? I want to talk about early on when every single entity in the nation was trying to buy food. And frankly, we were all kind of buying more food than we need because we didn't know what the pandemic was going to present to us. It was really hard, and we were preparing those emergency food bags with our stock. And even though we were pretty well stocked prior to the pandemic, we saw our food supplies go down. Right now, we are consistently keeping $1 million of food on order, and we are seeing better consistency. But I have to say that I continuously worry, as does our COO, about the consistency of the food supply and the threats to the food supply. I mean, we all go into the grocery store every week, and we see that there's impediments to our normal purchasing. There are certain items that aren't in, and that we do have to be aware that we need to stock up now to make sure that we have the food on hand in case there are shortages. That's part of our optimization project too, is to make sure that we can increase our capacity at the food bank facility and also increase the capacity at our network agencies facilities and increase their transportation capabilities. I am really worried about farm workers and their health and their safety and the continuity of the fresh fruits and vegetables in our food bank. And I'm sure we're all worried about this. So it's just really great to be thinking about how we can support people who are the closest to our food supply and their rights and their health and their safety as well. I read an article just the other day about how some of the farms aren't providing masks for the farm workers, and how can we, as concerned people in our community, support maybe putting pressure, or if those farming concerns can't afford those items, how can those be paid for by government to ensure that people who are closest to the food are safe and can continue to work in the fields?
Along those lines, do you make an effort to locally source as much of your food as possible, or is that less of a concern for you because of budget restraints, and that's more important to feed more people perhaps than it is to support local?
I think the answer to that is a yes, and we're trying to buy more local product. It's a little bit more expensive, and there's a pilot that we're going to run trying to buy food from minority and locally owned businesses. When we're buying, for instance, for a while we were buying lunches for our staff during shelter in place because we didn't want people to leave our facility. We wanted to keep them there and keep them safe. And we were connecting with more local restaurants and trying to buy from them. And that felt really good and right. Most of our produce comes from within the state of California, and through California Association of Food Banks, they are sourcing that food. So that's California grown primarily. So that's a good thing as well.
As far as volunteers go, your demand is way up. I suspect that means you need more volunteers. And how has it been bringing in volunteers and training them? And if you need to increase your numbers in volunteers, how has that been working with the pandemic?
Yes. So as I mentioned initially, we were really relying on one or two or three groups actually that were helping us within our facility. So it was the same people working together every day. We've lost those volunteers. They've been deployed to other areas, and so we remain supported by the county disaster workers, and we are now welcoming community volunteers into our facility. It's hard though, because before we were welcoming in about 18,000 unique visitors to our facility in a year. And that meant that every day we'd have shifts of 100, sometimes 200 people. And now we have to have smaller shifts. We have to socially distance. We have to make sure people fill out a health inventory before they come into our facility. And you know, it's hard. It's hard on us because we were a community community is in our middle name. We love having our community participate in ending hunger with us, and to have had to constrain to a smaller list of volunteers, had to have volunteers not be close together and enjoy the company of one another as profoundly as they did in the past. It's been a real shift. If you are interested in volunteering at the food bank, you can look at ACCFB.org and go to our volunteer page, and we are welcoming community volunteers in. But I do want to tell you, if you've volunteered with us in the past, it is a slightly different experience, but we need you more than ever now, because we're still packaging up produce, but we're also having to prepare those emergency food bags in big quantities every day.
A little bit about the types of food that you provide. You mentioned some of this with regard to your Solace house, but so I guess I'm looking for a little bit more information about the avenues that you provide the food. That you mentioned the drive-through sites and the Solace house, and then also the types of food that you're providing in the different locations. You have the prepared food bags. Is that all food that people have to go home and then cook? Is it food that homeless people can eat that is already prepared and doesn't need additional preparation? Just a little bit more about the details.
You are asking such great questions. I really appreciate these. So this is wonderful, because it is kind of a mystery if you haven't volunteered, or and we're so different right now. So there are specific bags that our staff have created that are appropriate for homeless populations or people who are living without cooking accommodations. So that's one particular kind of a bag. And then the emergency food bags generally have shelf-stable items in them. So they might have a cereal, a peanut butter, shelf-stable milk, canned fruit, canned vegetables, pasta, some kind of grain, and then probably a canned meat like canned chicken or canned tuna. And so, you know, it's your shelf-stable product. So it's a very different kind of a distribution than we have done in the past. Our agency network that are handing out food can handle products like frozen products. So for instance, early on when the pandemic first struck, we got an enormous contribution of Impossible burgers. So, and that's a plant-based meat. So that was really great for people who don't eat meat. And if you haven't tried an Impossible burger, it's almost impossible to tell them from a hamburger. They are incredibly magnificent things, you know. And so, you know, we would hand those out, or hand out frozen chicken or frozen chicken parts, frozen fish, frozen ground meat, things like that. We're still bagging up fresh fruits and vegetables for our partners to distribute to people. So that might be bags of oranges or apples or whatever the fruit is in season, things like carrots, lettuce, those types of products. And we are very fortunate to have a member agency network. So this could be a local religious organization down the street where you've seen lines in the past of people waiting to get food, to health centers, to sites where people are used to going to getting food, like a family resource center where people might get multiple services, to, St. Vincent de Paul, Salvation Army, places like that. So places large and small where people may be getting other services, and if food programming may be part of the array of services, they get people to come and use the organization, senior centers, places like that.
A couple of follow-up questions to this line of information. One is, so you talked about having such an increased demand, and I'm sure that means increased storage. And you mentioned that a little bit, but I'm wondering how you're handling storing all the excess food. Maybe I'll stop there. I'll let you answer that one, and then I'll ask the next one.
Okay, so this is where this optimization project coming in is going to help us so much, because right now we can store on hand about 1.6 million pounds of food. And I told you right now going out our door every week is 1 million pounds of food. So we would feel more comfortable if within our facility we could store a couple of million pounds of food. And then we're also have the opportunity to make grants to our member agencies to hopefully get them prepared to be able to store more food at their sites. And if we have more capacity at the food bank and then have more capacity at neighbors, that's the golden ticket.
And what percentage of the donations that you receive are monetary donations during, as opposed to food donations of food, like the Impossible Burgers? And what kind of limitations do you have on food donations? I know there are places like grocery outlet that take sort of not bad food, but close to being at the end of its sell-by date food, and they can get that more cheaply and sell it more cheaply. And I'm wondering if you have similar types of programs.
Mm-hmm. So we get far more monetary donations than food donations. It would probably be interesting for people to know that the food bank pays for most of the food that it acquires. Even the farm fresh produce that we get through California Association of Food Banks has a fee attached to it. And that's actually a good thing, because it gets the farmers to give us that product if we're helping them pay for their packaging or making some contribution towards their effort of getting it to us. So we pay for transportation and we'll pay a handling fee. We buy most of our shelf-stable items. So we buy truckloads of peanut butter, truckloads of tuna, truckloads of canned chicken. So those are things that we would pay for in the regular wholesale market. We are really grateful to the donors who have stepped up during COVID to help us out, and that has been great. And I'd like to call out a local company like Cliff Bar that has come around a couple of times and given us great food that is easy for almost any age group to eat and is really nutritious, nutrient dense, like Cliff Bars. So we're really grateful to them as a local partner. And so I hope that answers your question about the foods that we have. We do have capacity for frozen food and refrigerated food, and that's finite on our site. We've had the help of a donation of freezer space through Prologis. I think that's the right name. Locally, they're called Dreisbach, which is a company that's a local company that has helped the food bank since before I came there. Really a great local partner, and they've offered freezer space, storage space. So that's really good too. So if any of you has a truckload of chicken that you want to donate and we don't have freezer space, I'm sure Dreisbach would hold that for us.
I'll keep that in mind.
Just putting it out there. You never know.
Do you have limitations on the types of food you take? Like, would you take produce that somebody grew in their backyard garden? You know, when zucchini harvest comes around, there's only so much zucchini one can eat, and it can be a little overwhelming.
Yeah, I think for right now, what backyard zucchini growers are going to have to do is share that with their neighbors. Right now, our building is just completely sealed off to anybody but our staff. Again, that's a real safety measure, making sure that we are as protected and safe as we can be. And many food banks in the country have experienced COVID diagnosis within their facilities. You know, knock wood, I'm going to hit my head here. We have not yet, and part of the reason why is we have been very vigilant about sealing off our facility. So sorry, zucchini growers, share it with your neighbors this year.
Along those lines of being very vigilant, what kind of training do you have in place for your volunteers because of the pandemic to make sure that they're getting the additional training that they need to stay safe and to keep you and your regular employees safe?
Yeah, thank you. That's a really important question. So there is a health inventory that volunteers have to answer before they come in, and a temperature check. So and answer yes to any of the questions, or have a fever and you are not volunteering with us today. There are different protocols now, the social distancing and the hand washing stations and mask wearing. And so we are vigilant in training people about that. We are vigilant in training our staff in keeping masks on while they are at work. And I have to say, you know, that's a real adjustment for our staff, for Americans, for people in Alameda County. And I think it's so important. So carry this banner for me, please, about telling your friends and telling people, I don't care if you see them on the street and you're not wearing a mask, tell them to wear a mask, damn it. We've got to do this. We've got to stay safe.
Absolutely. So when you stopped providing soda as one of your foods, did you get criticism from the community at all, or from people who might regularly get food from you?
Laurel, this is a great question to ask, because I remember what it was like. We had moved into our new facility, the building at 7900 Edgewater Drive. I had kind of bet against the house that we would be able to pay for this facility. The food bank had never raised $5 million, and that was our nut to crack. And so we're having our first agency network meeting, and we had just said no to carbonated beverages. And I bravely stood in front of our network members and I asked them, how many of you are glad that we're not handing out soda anymore? And about 4 brave hands out of 40 went up. But they were, you know, they were high, they were good, they were solid with that. And I really had to straighten my spine and say that carbonated beverages are not food. And we need food. People in our community needed access to nutrition. And the gold standard for food banks has always been pounds. You heard me talk about pounds even today. And how food banks kind of hedge their bets at the end of the year was they'd take that carbonated beverage and it would make those scales react, and that's how we'd show that we'd made it. But that didn't feel right to me. And I'm telling you, I'm a person who's always loved a Diet Coke, so this was hard on me too. But I knew that it wasn't food and it wasn't right. And so we pulled the plug and we've never looked back. And it's so funny, like there are many things that I've done with ACCFB, but it feels like ceasing carbonated beverages, because we did it in 2005 and we were the first food bank in the nation to do it. It still stands as a very strong hallmark. But I want to go out being known for the equity and inclusion work. So I'm putting my marker there.
Similar to sodas, so you provide a lot of food for families and young children, and children love treats. And it would seem unfortunate for a child who is hungry because their family doesn't have money to never have access to treats. Do you provide treats, or do you always say, we're just giving you the nutritious food? If you want to give your kid treats, that's going to have to come out of your own pocket?
Well, as close as ACCFB gets is nutrition bars, like the Cliff Bars. And we really, I think that, well, wait a minute, let me retract that, because I actually think Girl Scout cookies still come into our facility. So I think I may have to retract.
Those are definitely treats.
Yeah, those are definitely treats. And you can tell it's Girl Scout cookie sales season when they start flying into the food bank. But things like if people donate candy and food dry barrels, we actually just destroy it. So don't donate it, because you're just throwing it in the garbage. You may as well throw it in your own compost pile.
Good to know. Thank you.
Yeah.
So you talked about the disproportionate effects of the economy and COVID-19 on minorities. Have you noticed, you may have said this, but I didn't catch it if you did. Have you noticed a specific difference in your own customers, or are you just seeing more of the same people you would normally see outside of the pandemic and the pandemic caused economic crisis?
I think this is a yes and yes. One thing that was pretty interesting to us was that immediately as COVID struck, we were getting calls from more Spanish speaking people. And that was actually received with a great deal of joy at ACCFB, because with all the controversy about immigrants, we felt that we were not serving the Latino, Latinx, Hispanic population as we should be. And we were delighted to have that population back. So that was one shift we saw right away. And I actually think that one of the merits of the contactless drive-through distributions is that there's a certain amount of anonymity there, and people felt pretty safe being able to go through those. And we did have Spanish speakers that were available. And so that was very helpful too. In our helpline, we can actually speak in almost any language or dialect because we have Alameda County's translation lines. But we do have regularly Spanish speakers, English speakers, Cantonese. So those languages are very available to us, and we can, and that's really important, especially being centered in Oakland.
Do you specifically collect demographic information? Do you even collect names and/or addresses?
We do collect names and address information through our helpline, because we want to refer. Sometimes we have to put names on a list for our agency members. They request that, or that we're helping them apply for programs like CalFresh. And so, of course, we're collecting a lot more information that way, or when we're doing a screening. There is a government requirement for one of our government programs, which is TFAP, the Emergency Food Assistance Program, where we are supposed to collect signatures. And early on in COVID, the government was saying we had to. And I, oh God, this is being recorded, but I'm going to say it anyway. I said we are not collecting signatures. We're not collecting names, and you can just put me in jail because I'm not doing it. We need to serve people. If you need paperwork, that's just too bad. Our agencies couldn't have possibly done that.
Yeah. Yes, when the paperwork and red tape overwhelms the service that you're providing, it doesn't make much sense. And is the same true for school lunches that you provide? Do you work directly with the school districts, and do they require, do they give you the information you need and you have to check names off the list, or how exactly does that work?
Well, see, this has been the most incredible food distribution, because what we did, and I should have drawn this out for everyone. I don't think I mentioned this. So how we helped with the school distributions was we gave them the bagged food, and the school teams handed it out with those prepackaged school meals that they were handing out in the distributions a couple of times a week. So literally, we dropped off emergency food bags, and the school staff handed out our emergency food bags along with the prepackaged prepared meals that they had bagged up. And it was great because we also were asked by the Family Law Center, I think it's what they're called, Family Law Center, I think that's right, to hand out information on domestic violence in some of the bags. I mean, just some really great information was able to be dispensed via those emergency food bags. So that was really great. And there wasn't any qualification for families that showed up to get those meals. The school districts just served the families that showed up, to my understanding.
Okay, I think it is 5 o'clock. I'm just double checking to make sure that I made it through all of the questions that I had, and I do think we've answered all of the questions that everyone has given us. Thank you again so much. This was super informative, and personally, I just had the idea of Alameda County Food Bank as a source of food for people who are hungry, and it's really clear to me that you do so much more than just provide food, and it's really heartwarming. Thank you so much for the work that you do, and for taking the time to be with us here today. I will put the link to our fundraiser again in the chat. So it's at the bottom of the chat for the people who are still on the Zoom call with us. A few people have just left. So that you can join our food drive, and we'll be sending an email out to our membership as well later today. Thank you very much for taking the time to be with us. And I want to also especially thank Christy Van Slyke and the rest of the program committee for all the work that they did in organizing and promoting this event and our food drive. And for those watching on YouTube, please feel free to share the video with friends and family who weren't able to join us live. Some really incredible information that we covered today. And this officially ends our program. I'm going to stop the live stream.